The dust-laden wind carried more than just the smell of sage and saddle leather, as Willow Knowles clutched the crumpled envelope in her trembling hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs while she stared at the elaborate script that decorated its surface, knowing the words inside could change everything if only she could read them. Spring of 1873 had brought little mercy to the drought-stricken lands of western Colorado Territory. Willow's small homestead, inherited from her father just 6 months prior, was barely hanging on. At 22, she had learned to survive by sheer determination, but the mysterious letter that had arrived 3 days ago represented both hope and frustration. The postmark showed it had traveled all the way from Boston, and it bore the seal of a law office she didn't recognize. "Confound it all," she muttered, turning the envelope over in her work-roughened hands for the 100th time. Her father had taught her many things: how to shoot straight, mend fences, and cook a decent stew, but reading wasn't among them. In the isolated foothills where they'd carved out their existence, schooling had been a luxury they couldn't afford. Willow tucked the letter into her apron pocket as she finished her morning chores. The 2 cows lowed softly as she milked them, the rhythm of her hands against their warm sides as familiar as her own heartbeat. Her mind, however, remained fixed on the letter. "You ladies don't need to read to survive, do you?" she said to the nearest cow, who flicked an ear in response. "Just need grass and water. Simple needs." The thought of riding into town to find someone to read the letter for her filled Willow with dread. Cedar Ridge was small, just a collection of buildings serving the scattered ranches and homesteads of the area. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and the idea of laying bare her inability to read and whatever news the letter contained before the gossips of Cedar Ridge was unbearable. As she carried the milk pails back toward the small cabin, a movement on the horizon caught her eye. A rider approached, the silhouette unmistakable against the morning sky. Even at this distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive posture of Vaughn Thornton. Willow quickly ducked into the cabin, setting the milk on the table before checking her appearance in the small mirror hung by the door. Her auburn hair was escaping its practical braid, and a smudge of dirt decorated one cheek. She hastily wiped it away and pinched some color into her pale cheeks. Vaughn Thornton had arrived in Cedar Ridge just over a year ago, purchasing the struggling Triple T ranch that bordered Willow's modest homestead to the west. Unlike most newcomers who found the harsh landscape unforgiving, Vaughn seemed to thrive on the challenge. At 28, he'd already established himself as one of the more successful ranchers in the area. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of summer storms, Vaughn cut an impressive figure on horseback. His presence never failed to set Willow's heart racing, though she'd done her best to hide it during their infrequent encounters. By the time Vaughn's horse trotted into the yard, Willow had composed herself and stepped back outside, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "Morning, Miss Knowles," Vaughn called, touching the brim of his worn hat. His voice carried that slight Texas drawl that she found so appealing. "Mr. Thornton," she replied with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" Vaughn dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements easy and confident. The leather of his saddle creaked as he looped the reins around the hitching post. "Found one of your calves wandered onto my property," he said. "Got him in my corral, thought I'd ride over and let you know I can help bring him back whenever you're ready." Relief flooded through Willow. She'd noticed the calf missing the previous evening, but had hoped he'd simply hidden himself away somewhere on her land. "That's mighty kind of you. I was worried about the little fellow." Vaughn's gaze swept over the small homestead, taking in the weathered cabin, the carefully tended garden plot, and the few head of cattle grazing in the nearby pasture. His expression softened slightly. "How are you managing, Miss Knowles? This drought's been hard on everyone." The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than pity, almost undid her. Willow swallowed hard before answering. "We're getting by. The creek's still running, at least for now." Vaughn nodded, his eyes still surveying the property. Your fence on the north side could use some repair. I noticed it when I was riding the boundary yesterday. I know, Willow admitted. It's on my list, just haven't gotten to it yet. The list of repairs seemed to grow daily, while her strength and resources dwindled at the same pace. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft whickering of Vaughn's horse. The letter in Willow's pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. "Mr. Thornton," she began hesitantly, then stopped. "Yes." His gray eyes focused on her face, and Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. In that moment, a decision crystallized. Vaughn Thornton was known for his straightforward manner and integrity. If she had to trust someone with her secret and the contents of the mysterious letter, it might as well be him. "I wonder if I might ask a favor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A personal favor." Vaughn's expression remained neutral, but he nodded encouragingly. "Of course, Miss Knowles." Willow reached into her pocket and withdrew the envelope, its paper now soft from constant handling. "I received this letter several days ago, and I was wondering if you might." Understanding dawned in his eyes, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "You'd like me to read it for you?" The gentle way he asked, without a hint of judgment, loosened something tight in Willow's chest. "Yes," she admitted. "My father never taught me my letters properly, and out here there wasn't much call for reading anyway." Vaughn nodded, accepting the envelope she offered. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Texas," he said conversationally, as if they were discussing nothing more significant than the weather. "She'd have my hide if I didn't offer to help a neighbor." His matter-of-fact response eased Willow's embarrassment. She led him to the small porch, where two rough-hewn chairs flanked a small table. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Thornton? It's the least I can offer for your trouble." "That would be welcome, thank you." While Willow busied herself inside the cabin, Vaughn carefully opened the envelope, his brow furrowing slightly as he began to read. By the time she returned with 2 steaming mugs, his expression had grown serious. "Is it bad news?" she asked, setting the coffee down with hands that weren't quite steady. Vaughn looked up, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "Not bad exactly, but important." He took a breath. "It's from a law firm in Boston, Caldwell, Harrington, and Walsh. It concerns your mother's family, the Abbotts." Willow sank into the chair opposite him. "My mother's family. But they disowned her when she married my father. I've never even met them. According to this letter, your maternal grandfather, Jonathan Abbott, passed away 3 months ago," Vaughn continued, his deep voice measured and calm. "He left a substantial estate, and as his only surviving grandchild, you've inherited a portion of it." The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath Willow's feet. "Inherited? But that can't be right. Mother always said they wanted nothing to do with us." "The letter explains that your grandfather regretted the estrangement but was too proud to reach out during his lifetime. This is his way of making amends." Vaughn took a sip of coffee, giving her a moment to absorb the information. "There's more. To claim the inheritance, you need to travel to Boston within the next 6 months and meet with the executors of the will." Willow stared at him, disbelief written across her features. "Boston? I can't possibly. I mean the homestead, the animals." "There's a bank draft enclosed," Vaughn added, removing a slip of paper from the envelope. $500 to cover your travel expenses." $500. More money than Willow had seen in her entire life. She closed her eyes, trying to make sense of it all. The inheritance could save her homestead, could provide security she'd never known. But Boston was another world, filled with educated, sophisticated people who would immediately recognize her as the uneducated country girl she was. "I can't read," she whispered, opening her eyes to find Vaughn watching her intently. "How am I supposed to navigate train schedules, hotel registrations, legal documents? How am I supposed to face these high society lawyers when I can't even sign my own name properly?" Vaughn set the letter down and leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Miss Knowles, Willow," he said, using her given name for the first time. "We'll do this together." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Willow stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" "I said we'll do this together," Vaughn repeated firmly. "I can teach you to read enough to get by, at least, and I have business in Chicago I've been putting off. I could escort you as far as there, help you make the connections to Boston." "Why would you do that?" Willow asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "We barely know each other." Vaughn's expression softened. "My father used to say that true neighbors help each other through the hard times without being asked. It's the code we live by out here." He paused, something flickering in his eyes that Willow couldn't quite interpret. "Besides, I've been meaning to speak with you about possibly purchasing water rights from your creek. This would give us time to discuss it properly." So there was something in it for him after all. The realization shouldn't have disappointed her, but somehow it did. Still, his offer represented the only realistic chance she had of claiming her inheritance. "I couldn't pay you until after the inheritance comes through," she said hesitantly. Vaughn shook his head. "I'm not asking for payment, Willow, just the opportunity to help a neighbor and perhaps, in time, a friend." Friend. The word settled warm in her chest. Willow hadn't had many friends since her father died. The isolation of her homestead and the constant work required to maintain it left little time for social calls. "When would we start?" she asked, her decision made even as uncertainty clouded her thoughts. "No time like the present," Vaughn replied with a small smile. "I can come by tomorrow afternoon with some books I have at the ranch. We'll start with the basics, and before you know it, you'll be reading that letter yourself." As Vaughn mounted his horse to leave, promising to return the following day, Willow watched him ride away with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Her life had just taken an unexpected turn, all because of a letter she couldn't read and a cowboy who offered to help her find her way through unfamiliar territory. What she didn't know then was that the journey ahead would change not only her circumstances but her heart as well. True to his word, Vaughn arrived the next afternoon with saddlebags full of books. As he unpacked them on her kitchen table, Willow marveled at the collection, everything from children's primers to leather-bound classics. "These were my mother's," he explained, handling a well-worn copy of McGuffey's Eclectic Reader with particular care. "She taught me and my brothers from these very books." "You have brothers?" Willow asked, realizing how little she actually knew about her neighbor. "Had," Vaughn corrected gently. "Lost Thomas in '62 at Shiloh. Matthew passed from fever 2 years later." A shadow crossed his face before he visibly shook it off. "But that's ancient history now. Let's focus on the present." For the next 2 hours, they sat at Willow's kitchen table, heads bent close together as Vaughn patiently introduced her to the alphabet. His teaching style was methodical and encouraging, never making her feel foolish when she struggled. "You're a natural," he said as she successfully identified several letters in sequence. "You've got a good eye for detail." Willow flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "My father always said I could spot a lame horse at 100 yards. "Different skill, same sharp mind," Vaughn replied with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. The reading lessons continued daily, fitted around their respective chores. Vaughn would arrive in the late afternoon, often bringing supplies or helping with repairs around the homestead before they settled in for her lesson. As promised, he also helped retrieve her wayward calf and mended the north fence himself, brushing aside her protests that he was doing too much. "Consider it an investment in our future partnership," he said simply, driving home the last fence post with powerful strokes of the mallet. The words future and partnership lingered in Willow's mind long after he'd departed each evening. She told herself not to read too much into them. Vaughn was simply being kind, fulfilling the neighborly code he'd mentioned. But sometimes she caught him looking at her in a way that made her wonder if there might be more to his assistance than mere neighborliness. As the weeks passed, Willow's progress surprised even her. The letters began to form words, the words sentences, and gradually the mysterious shapes on the page transformed into meaning she could grasp. Vaughn proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but challenging, always pushing her to try a little more each day. "You're reading at a second-grade level already," he told her one evening in late May, genuine pride in his voice. "At this rate, you'll be writing your own letters by the time we reach Boston." The mention of Boston brought Willow back to reality. In the pleasure of learning and Vaughn's daily visits, she'd almost forgotten the purpose behind their lessons. The inheritance, the journey east, the impending departure from the only home she'd ever known, it all came rushing back. "When do you think we should leave?" she asked, suddenly anxious. "The letter said I have 6 months, but that's already down to less than 5 now." Vaughn considered the question seriously. "The cattle drive season will be starting soon. Most of the ranchers around here will be busy through June and July. I've got enough hands to manage without me, but I'll need to make arrangements." He paused, thinking. Early August might be best. "The worst of the summer heat will be past, and we'll reach Boston before the autumn storms make travel difficult." Willow nodded, trying to imagine herself in a big eastern city, surrounded by strangers and unfamiliar customs. The thought was terrifying, but with Vaughn beside her, at least as far as Chicago, it seemed manageable. "Do you ever regret leaving Texas?" she asked suddenly. "Moving to a place where you didn't know anyone," the question seemed to surprise him. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains visible through her kitchen window. "Sometimes," he admitted finally. "Especially in winter when the wind cuts right through you, but I needed a fresh start after the war, after losing my brothers." "Too many ghosts back in Texas." He turned to look at her directly. "But I've never regretted coming here specifically. This land has its own kind of beauty, its own challenges. It's helped me find my way back to myself." The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep in Willow. She understood the need to find oneself in the vastness of the Western landscape. Her father had brought her here as a child for similar reasons after her mother's death, seeking a place where the raw beauty of nature could heal wounded hearts. "I'm afraid," she confessed softly. "Not just of the journey, but of what I might find in Boston. What if my grandfather's family looks down on me? What if they regret including me in the will when they meet me?" Vaughn reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his own. His skin was warm and calloused, the touch sending an unexpected thrill through her. "Then they'd be fools," he said firmly. "You're one of the strongest, most determined people I've ever met, Willow Knowles. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." The conviction in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. No one had believed in her like this since her father died. She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining briefly before Vaughn seemed to realize what he'd done and gently withdrew. "It's getting late," he said, rising from the table. "I should head back before dark." Willow walked him to the door, acutely aware of the shifting dynamic between them. What had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something deeper, something neither of them had anticipated. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, standing in the doorway as he settled his hat on his head. Vaughn hesitated. "I need to ride into town tomorrow. There's a telegram I've been meaning to send about some cattle I'm purchasing, but I'll be by the day after, first thing in the morning." "We can work on writing your name." As she watched him ride away, silhouetted against the setting sun, Willow acknowledged to herself what she'd been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Vaughn Thornton. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. There had been no indication that he felt the same way, beyond the basic kindness he'd shown her. And soon, she would be leaving for Boston, perhaps never to return if the inheritance was substantial enough. The following day dragged without the anticipation of Vaughn's visit. Willow threw herself into her chores, determined to keep busy. She practiced forming letters with a piece of charcoal on the smooth inner bark of a pine branch, the way Vaughn had shown her. By mid-afternoon, she had managed a recognizable version of her own name, the achievement bringing a fierce burst of pride. As dusk approached, she heard hoofbeats in the yard and hurried outside, thinking Vaughn had changed his plans. Instead, she found Sheriff Daniel Morgan dismounting from his dappled gray horse. "Evening, Miss Knowles," the sheriff greeted her, removing his hat. His expression was grave, setting alarm bells ringing in Willow's mind. "Sheriff Morgan, what brings you out this way?" The older man cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm afraid I have some troubling news. There was an incident in town today. Mr. Thornton was involved." Willow's heart seemed to stop beating. "Is he hurt? What happened?" "He's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly, "but he's been shot. Doc Henderson's tending to him now at his office in town." The world tilted beneath Willow's feet. "Shot? Who would shoot Vaughn?" "Jesse Ryder," the sheriff replied, his mouth set in a grim line. "Seems Ryder took exception to Mr. Thornton buying that parcel of land he'd been eyeing." Words were exchanged at the Silverton Saloon and Ryder pulled his gun. "Mr. Thornton is fast, managed to draw and fire too, but both men were hit." "And Ryder?" Willow asked, already moving toward the barn where her horse was stabled. "Dead," Sheriff Morgan said flatly. "Mr. Thornton's shot caught him square in the chest. It was self-defense, plain and simple." Every witness in the saloon confirmed it. Willow barely heard the rest of the sheriff's explanation as she saddled her mare with trembling hands. All she could think about was Vaughn lying wounded, perhaps dying, while she stood helplessly on her homestead. The ride to Cedar Ridge was the longest of her life, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 40 minutes at the punishing pace she set. The main street was unusually busy for early evening. Clusters of people gathered outside the saloon and the doctor's office, discussing the shooting in hushed voices. Willow dismounted in front of Doc Henderson's place, tying her horse to the hitching post with shaking hands. As she pushed open the door, the familiar medicinal smell of the doctor's office hit her carbolic acid and witch hazel, undercut with the metallic tang of blood. "Miss Knowles," Doc Henderson's wife, Margaret, greeted her from behind a small reception desk. The older woman's kind face was creased with concern. "I thought you might come. He's been asking for you." "How is he?" Willow managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The bullet went through his right shoulder. Clean wound, thankfully missed anything vital. "My husband removed the bullet and stitched him up about an hour ago." Margaret's expression softened. "He's young and strong. With proper care, he should recover fully." Relief made Willow's knees weak. "Can I see him?" Margaret nodded, leading her to a small room at the back of the building. "Don't tire him out. He's lost a fair amount of blood." Vaughn lay on a narrow bed, his upper body propped up with pillows, his right shoulder heavily bandaged. His normally tanned face was pale, making his dark hair seem even darker against the white pillowcase. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Willow approached the bed quietly, afraid to disturb him. As if sensing her presence, Vaughn's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. "You came," he murmured, a faint smile touching his lips. "Of course I came," Willow replied, pulling a chair close to the bedside. "Sheriff Morgan told me what happened. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," Vaughn replied dryly, then winced as he tried to shift position. "Not my first bullet wound, but it never gets more pleasant." Despite everything, Willow felt a smile tugging at her lips. His spirit was intact at least. "The sheriff said it was self-defense." Vaughn's expression darkened. "Ryder was drunk and angry. I tried to walk away, but he wouldn't let it go, drew on me before I could clear the saloon doors." He paused, his eyes troubled. "I didn't want to kill him." "I know," Willow said softly, understanding the burden such an act placed on a man like Vaughn, regardless of the circumstances. She hesitated, then reached out to touch his left hand, which lay atop the blanket. "What can I do to help?" Vaughn turned his hand to grasp hers weakly. "You're already doing it, being here." His gaze held hers, something vulnerable in its depths that she'd never seen before. "I was afraid I might not see you again." The simple admission sent a wave of emotion through Willow. "It would take more than Jesse Ryder to keep me away," she said, trying for lightness despite the tears threatening to spill. Doc says I'll need to rest for at least 3 weeks, Vaughn continued, frustration evident in his voice. Can't lift anything, can't ride, certainly can't travel to Boston. The inheritance and their planned journey had been the furthest thing from Willow's mind, but his words brought it rushing back. 3 weeks of recovery would push their departure well into August, leaving precious little time to reach Boston before the 6-month deadline. Boston can wait, she said firmly. Your recovery comes first. Vaughn shook his head slightly, grimacing at the movement. No, you need to claim that inheritance. It's too important to your future. And you need to heal properly, or you won't have a future, Willow countered, surprising herself with her vehemence. We'll figure something out, but right now you need to rest. Doc Henderson appeared in the doorway, a glass of water and some powdered medicine in hand. Time for more laudanum, Mr. Thornton. It'll help with the pain and let you sleep. Vaughn made a face but didn't argue as the doctor mixed the medicine into the water and helped him drink it. Within minutes, his eyelids were growing heavy. Will you stay? He asked Willow, his voice already slurring slightly from the medication. As long as they'll let me, she promised, squeezing his hand gently. As Vaughn drifted into drug-induced sleep, Doc Henderson motioned Willow out into the hallway. He'll need proper care for at least a fortnight, the doctor explained quietly. Margaret and I can keep him here for a day or two, but we don't have the space or staff for a longer stay. He can come to my homestead, Willow said without hesitation. I can look after him there. Doc Henderson's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. That's a generous offer, Miss Knowles, but it wouldn't be proper. A single woman caring for a single man under the same roof, you know how people talk in a small town like Cedar Ridge. Willow lifted her chin defiantly. Let them talk. Vaughn helped me when I needed it most. I won't abandon him now just because of idle gossip. The doctor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've always had your father's backbone, I'll give you that. If you're certain, we can have him moved the day after tomorrow, provided there's no sign of infection. That night, Willow stayed in a small guest room at the doctor's residence attached to his office. She slept fitfully, waking often to check on Vaughn, whose sleep was restless as the laudanum wore off. By morning, he was feverish, his wound showing the angry red signs of early infection. This changes things, Doc Henderson said grimly after examining the wound and redressing it with carbolic solution. We need to get the infection under control before he can be moved anywhere. For 3 days, Willow barely left Vaughn's side, helping Margaret Henderson apply cool compresses to his forehead and coaxing him to drink broth and willow bark tea when he was lucid enough. The fever raged, bringing with it delirious mumblings sometimes about his brothers, sometimes about battles Willow could only assume were from his time in the war, and occasionally, heart-stoppingly, about her. Willow, he'd murmur, his eyes glassy with fever but fixed on her face. Don't go to Boston. Stay with me. She didn't know if it was the fever talking or his true feelings breaking through the barriers of consciousness, but each such utterance made her heart race. On the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Vaughn woke clear-headed but weak, his usual vigor sapped by the infection and blood loss. You're still here, he said when he found Willow dozing in the chair beside his bed. She startled awake, relief flooding through her at the sight of his clear eyes and more natural color. Where else would I be? You should be at your homestead. Your animals are being tended by Billy Jensen from the livery stable. I'm paying him a fair wage from the bank draft that came with my letter. Willow leaned forward, studying Vaughn's face. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, he admitted with a weak smile. But better than yesterday, I think. How long have I been here? 4 days, Willow replied. The fever only broke last night. Vaughn closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this information. 4 days lost. And you've been here the whole time? Most of it, she confirmed, suddenly self-conscious under his intent gaze. Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything foolish, like try to get up before you were ready. A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. Always the practical one, Miss Knowles. The use of her formal name stung slightly after the intimacy of the past few days, but Willow reminded herself that Vaughn might not remember his fever-induced confessions and might not have meant them even if he did. Over the next week, Vaughn's strength gradually returned. The infection cleared completely, and Doc Henderson pronounced him well enough to be moved, though still far from fully recovered. "My ranch hands can come fetch me," Vaughn insisted when the doctor mentioned discharge plans. "Jackson's been running things in my absence. He can spare a man and wagon." "Actually," Willow interjected hesitantly, "I've already arranged for you to come to my homestead." At Vaughn's startled expression, she hurried on. "It's closer to town if complications arise, and I've prepared the spare room. Billy Jensen helped me move a proper bed in there, and it's the least I can do after all you've done for me." Vaughn's expression was unreadable. "Willow, I appreciate the offer, but you don't owe me anything." "And it wouldn't be proper, that's what Doc Henderson said," she interrupted, a hint of defiance in her tone. "But I don't care about proper right now. I care about you getting the rest and care you need to recover fully." Something flickered in Vaughn's gray eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't quite identify. "You're sure about this?" "Absolutely certain," Willow replied firmly. And so, 10 days after the shooting, Vaughn Thornton was carefully loaded into Billy Jensen's wagon and transported to Willow's homestead. The journey, though relatively short, left him pale and sweating from pain, but he refused to take laudanum before they arrived. "Need my wits about me," he insisted when Doc Henderson offered the bottle before departure. The spare room in Willow's cabin had been her father's. She'd cleaned it thoroughly and aired it out, replacing the worn quilt with her best bedspread and adding touches a vase of wildflowers, a stack of books to make it more welcoming. With Billy's help, she got Vaughn settled in the bed, his face gray with exhaustion by the time his head hit the pillow. "I'll stop by tomorrow to check on him," Doc Henderson promised as he prepared to leave. "In the meantime, keep the wound clean and dry, make sure he drinks plenty of fluids, and watch for any signs of returning fever." Left alone with Vaughn for the first time since the shooting, Willow felt suddenly awkward. Their relationship had changed, though she couldn't quite define how. The easy camaraderie of their reading lessons seemed distant now, overshadowed by the intensity of the past 10 days. "You should rest," she said, hovering in the doorway of the spare room. "I'll be just outside if you need anything." Vaughn's eyes were already closing, but he reached out his left hand toward her. "Willow," he murmured, "thank you." The simple gratitude in those two words touched her deeply. Impulsively, she crossed the room and took his outstretched hand, squeezing it gently. "Rest now. We can talk tomorrow." Over the next week, they established a new routine. Willow would rise early to tend to the animals and prepare breakfast, then help Vaughn to the kitchen table, where he insisted on sitting upright for meals despite the pain it clearly caused him. After breakfast, she would change his bandages and help him back to bed for a morning rest while she completed her outdoor chores. In the afternoons, when Vaughn was stronger, they would continue her reading lessons. The roles had shifted slightly now. She would read aloud to him from one of his books, practicing her new skills while providing him with entertainment during his convalescence. "You're a quick study," he commented one afternoon as she successfully navigated a particularly challenging passage from The Last of the Mohicans. "Most adults would take years to progress as far as you have in months." Willow flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I have a good teacher." Their gazes met and held for a moment longer than necessary, something unspoken passing between them. Vaughn was the first to look away, clearing his throat slightly. "Have you given more thought to Boston?" he asked, changing the subject. "Even with my injury, you should still go." "The inheritance could secure your future here." The question caught Willow off guard. With all that had happened, Boston and the inheritance had receded to the back of her mind. "I haven't decided," she admitted. It doesn't seem right to leave while you're still recovering. I'm mending well, Vaughn insisted. Another week, and I'll be able to return to my own ranch. You shouldn't delay your journey on my account. There was something in his tone that troubled Willow a deliberate distance, as if he were pulling away from her. Do you want me to go to Boston? She asked directly. Vaughn's expression grew guarded. What I want doesn't matter. This is about your future, Willow. It matters to me, she persisted, setting the book aside. Be honest with me, Vaughn. After everything we've been through these past months, don't I deserve that much? Something in her words seemed to strike home. Vaughn closed his eyes briefly, a muscle working in his jaw. When he opened them again, the guardedness was gone, replaced by raw emotion that took her breath away. No, I don't want you to go to Boston, he admitted, his voice low and intense. The thought of you leaving, perhaps never coming back if you find a better life there, it's been tearing me apart, but I have no right to ask you to stay. Willow's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Why not? Because I have nothing to offer you, Vaughn replied, frustration evident in his voice. My ranch is still finding its footing. I'm not a wealthy man, Willow. I can't give you the kind of life your grandfather's inheritance might provide. Did it ever occur to you, Willow said softly, that I might not want wealth or a grand life in Boston, that I might want something else entirely? Vaughn went very still, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. What do you want, Willow? The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Willow gathered her courage, knowing that her next words would irrevocably change the course of their relationship. I want to stay here on my land. I want to claim my inheritance to secure that future, not to abandon it. She took a deep breath. And I want you to be part of that future, Vaughn, if that's something you might want too. For one terrible moment, Vaughn didn't respond, and Willow feared she had misread everything: his concern, his care, the looks that had passed between them. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand, drawing her closer to his chair. I've wanted that since the first day I rode onto your homestead and saw you standing there, proud and determined despite all the challenges you faced, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. But I never dared hope you might feel the same way. Joy bubbled up inside Willow, bright and effervescent. Even though I couldn't read, she asked, half teasing, half serious. Especially because of how you faced that challenge, Vaughn replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Your courage in admitting it to me, your determination to learn, those are the qualities that matter, Willow. Not whether you could read a letter when it arrived. She leaned forward then, drawn by an irresistible force, and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tender, a promise rather than a passion, mindful of his injury. When she pulled back, Vaughn's eyes were shining with an emotion that made her heart soar. I think, he said slowly, that we should both go to Boston together. Claim your inheritance and then return here to build something lasting, something that combines your land and mine into a future we create together. Together, Willow echoed, the word filling her with certainty. I like the sound of that. The Boston journey would come later. Vaughn's recovery took precedence, and in truth, neither of them was in a hurry to leave the cocoon of connection they'd created in Willow's small cabin. By late July, Vaughn was strong enough to return to his own ranch, though he still wore his arm in a sling and tired easily. I should go, he said reluctantly one evening, standing on Willow's porch after supper. My men have been managing admirably, but there are decisions that need my attention. Willow nodded, understanding the pull of responsibility even as she dreaded the empty quiet his absence would leave. When will you be back? Tomorrow, Vaughn promised, his good arm encircling her waist. And the day after that, and the day after that, until you're thoroughly sick of seeing me ride up to your door. That's not likely to happen, she replied, smiling up at him. He bent to kiss her, a gesture that had become wonderfully familiar over the past weeks. One more thing before I go, he said, reaching into his pocket. I had this made in town. Asked Doc Henderson to pick it up for me last time he visited. He withdrew a small leather pouch and tipped its contents into Willow's palm, a slender gold ring set with a single modest pearl. Vaughn, she breathed, staring at the ring in disbelief. I know it's fast, he said quickly. And if you want to wait until after Boston, or until I'm fully recovered, I understand. But I wanted you to know my intentions are serious, Willow. When I say I want a future with you, I mean as my wife. Tears blurred Willow's vision as she looked from the ring to Vaughn's earnest face. Ask me properly, she whispered. Vaughn smiled, taking the ring from her palm. Despite his injured shoulder, he lowered himself carefully to one knee on the porch boards. Willow Knowles, will you marry me? Will you join your life and land with mine, build a future together here in this place we both love? Yes, she said without hesitation, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. Yes, I will marry you, Vaughn Thornton. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her properly, his good arm pulling her close against him. In that moment, Willow knew with absolute certainty that no inheritance, no matter how substantial, could ever compare to the wealth of loving and being loved by this man. They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher who passed through Cedar Ridge once a month. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by Doc and Margaret Henderson, Sheriff Morgan, and a handful of hands from Vaughn's ranch. Willow wore her mother's dress, carefully altered by Margaret's skilled hands, and carried a bouquet of late summer wildflowers. Their journey to Boston was delayed until September, by which time Vaughn had regained nearly full use of his injured arm. The train journey east was a revelation for Willow, who had never traveled beyond the Colorado Territory. Each new city they passed through, Denver, Kansas City, Chicago, seemed more overwhelming than the last. A cascade of noise, smells, and bustling humanity that both frightened and exhilarated her. Through it all, Vaughn remained her steady anchor, navigating the complexities of train schedules and hotel registrations with quiet confidence. He never drew attention to the fact that she still struggled with reading certain documents, simply handling them himself or quietly explaining them to her when necessary. Boston, when they finally arrived, was unlike anything Willow had imagined: a city of brick and stone, of leafy commons and gleaming harbors, of wealth so evident it seemed to shimmer in the autumn air. The law offices of Caldwell, Harrington, and Walsh occupied an imposing building near the financial district, its marble steps and brass fixtures speaking of old money and established power. "Ready?" Vaughn asked as they stood outside the massive oak doors, Willow clutching his arm tightly. She nodded, drawing strength from his solid presence beside her. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, they were greeted by a clerk who led them to a well-appointed conference room where 3 men in expensive suits awaited them. The eldest, a white-haired gentleman with piercing blue eyes, rose as they entered. "Miss Knowles, I presume? I am Harold Caldwell. Your grandfather was my oldest friend as well as my client." His gaze moved to Vaughn, a question in his eyes. "My husband, Vaughn Thornton," Willow introduced, taking comfort in the simple truth of those words. If Caldwell was surprised by this information, he concealed it well. "A pleasure, Mr. Thornton. Please, both of you, be seated. We have much to discuss." What followed was a detailed explanation of Jonathan Abbott's estate and Willow's inheritance. As the only grandchild of the wealthy shipping magnate, she had been left 1/3 of his considerable fortune, a sum that made Willow's head spin when Caldwell finally named the figure. $300,000, Vaughn repeated, his voice carefully neutral despite the shock Willow knew he must be feeling. "And the other 2/3, divided between various charitable institutions, hospitals, orphanages, educational foundations," Caldwell explained. Jonathan was a philanthropist at heart, especially in his later years. "Did he leave a personal message for me?" Willow asked, finding her voice at last. "Something to explain why he never contacted me during his lifetime." Caldwell's expression softened slightly. "He did." The lawyer opened a drawer and withdrew an envelope, handing it to Willow. "He wrote this in his final weeks, when he knew his time was growing short. Willow stared at the envelope, her grandfather's bold handwriting addressing it simply to my granddaughter, Willow. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and withdrew the letter inside. For a moment, panic seized her as she looked at the densely written page. Despite her progress, reading something this complex would still be challenging. Then she felt Vaughn's hand cover hers beneath the table, a silent reassurance. Taking a deep breath, she began to read slowly, sounding out the words as she went. "My dear Willow," the letter began. "By the time you read these words, I will be gone from this world, and you will have learned of your inheritance. Money is a poor substitute for the years of love and connection I denied us both through my stubborn pride, but it is all I have left to give you now. Your mother, my beloved daughter Elizabeth, was always strong-willed and independent qualities I admired until she set her heart on a man I considered beneath her station. When she defied me to marry your father, I allowed my pride to sever the bond between us. It was the greatest mistake of my life, one I have regretted every day since. I learned of your mother's passing too late to attend her funeral. By then, you and your father had already departed for the Western Territories. I hired investigators to locate you, but it took years before they succeeded. When I finally learned where you were, illness had already begun its work on me. Rather than subject you to meeting a dying old man with whom you had no connection, I chose instead to secure your future through my will. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man's foolishness. Know that I would have been proud to know you, as I was always proud of your mother, though I failed to tell her so while I had the chance. Live well, Willow. Use this inheritance to create the life you desire, not the one others might choose for you. In this, at least, honor the independent spirit that runs in our blood. With deepest affection and regret, your grandfather, Jonathan Abbott." Willow finished reading, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Vaughn's arms slipped around her shoulders, offering silent support as she absorbed her grandfather's words. "Thank you for bringing this to me," she said finally, carefully folding the letter and returning it to its envelope. "It means more than the inheritance itself." Caldwell nodded, something like approval in his sharp eyes. "Jonathan would have liked you, Miss Knowles, Mrs. Thornton. You have his directness." The remainder of the meeting concerned the practicalities of transferring the inheritance, establishing accounts, arranging for funds to be accessible in Colorado, discussing investment options. Through it all, Vaughn remained at Willow's side, offering his perspective when asked, but always deferring final decisions to her. They remained in Boston for 2 weeks, settling the legalities and visiting places. Jonathan Abbott had frequented his club, his favorite restaurant, the shipping offices that had been the source of his fortune. Caldwell, warming to them considerably after that first meeting, acted as their guide to a world Willow had never imagined being part of. "Will you stay in Boston?" the lawyer asked during their final dinner together. "Your grandfather's house on Beacon Hill is part of your inheritance. It's a beautiful property, one of the finest in the city." Willow exchanged a glance with Vaughn before answering. "No, Mr. Caldwell, our home is in Colorado. We've built lives there that mean something to us. Not to mention a ranch that's finally turning a profit," Vaughn added with a smile. "Though I won't pretend this inheritance won't make a significant difference to our operations." Caldwell raised his wine glass in a toast. "To Colorado, then. May it appreciate what Boston is losing." They departed Boston in early October, the city's trees aflame with autumn colors that reminded Willow of the aspen groves in the Colorado mountains. The return journey seemed faster somehow, their compartment on the train now filled with plans and possibilities rather than uncertainties. "We could expand both properties," Vaughn suggested as they crossed the Mississippi. "Join our lands officially, build a larger operation that combines your water rights with my grazing lands. And a proper house," Willow added, warming to the vision. "Something with enough room for children eventually, and a library." Vaughn smiled at that, taking her hand. A library filled with books for you to read to our children, teaching them as I taught you. The image filled Willow with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. I never thought I could have this, she confessed softly. A husband who respects me, a secure future, the chance to build something lasting, all because of a letter I couldn't read and a cowboy who offered to help me. You're wrong about one thing, Vaughn corrected gently. This future isn't because of the letter or because of me. It's because of you, Willow, your courage in admitting what you didn't know, your determination to learn, your willingness to trust me when trust didn't come easily to you. The inheritance may provide the means, but you provided the heart. When they finally returned to Cedar Ridge in late October, the mountains were dusted with the first snow of the season, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Their homecoming was quite a return to the lands they loved, now transformed by possibility. The first thing they did was commission a new house to be built on the boundary between their two properties, a symbol of the union they had created. While construction proceeded through the winter, they divided their time between Willow's cabin and Vaughn's ranch house, learning the rhythms of married life with a joy that sustained them through the long, cold months. By spring, as new grass greened the valleys and wildflowers began to dot the hillsides, their new home was completed, a sturdy two-story structure of local stone and timber, with wide windows that captured the mountain views and, as promised, a library with built-in shelves already beginning to fill with books. It was in this library, on a bright May afternoon exactly 1 year after Vaughn had first read her grandfather's letter to her, that Willow shared her own important news. I've been to see Doc Henderson, she said, setting aside the book she'd been reading, one of many she now enjoyed with growing confidence. He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now. Vaughn looked up from his desk where he'd been reviewing cattle purchase records. Confirmed what? Willow crossed the room to perch on the edge of his desk, taking his hands in hers. That by next winter our family will be growing by one. Comprehension dawned slowly, then all at once in Vaughn's expression. A baby, he asked, his voice hushed with wonder. We're having a baby. Willow nodded, her smile radiant. Due in December, according to the doctor. Vaughn stood, pulling her gently into his arms, mindful of her condition though nothing yet showed. A child, he whispered against her hair. Our child. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace with the promise of new life between them, Willow thought of all the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment: her grandfather's letter, her inability to read it, Vaughn's offer of help, the shooting that had nearly taken him from her before they'd truly begun. What are you thinking? Vaughn asked, noticing her momentary distraction. That sometimes the most important words are the ones we don't understand at first, she replied, looking up at him with eyes full of love. And that the best journeys are the ones we take together. Vaughn's answer was a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built on courage, trust, and the enduring power of two hearts finding their way to each other across the vast, untamed beauty of the western frontier. In the years that followed, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Willow often reflected on how a single letter, one she couldn't read, had changed the course of her life. But it wasn't the inheritance that had made the difference, nor even the connection to a grandfather she'd never known. It was the moment she'd admitted her vulnerability to a kind-eyed cowboy who had looked at her and said, "We'll do this together." Those simple words had been the true inheritance, the beginning of a partnership that would sustain them through all the joys and challenges of a life built together. Word by word, day by day, in the shadow of the mountains they both called home.